Don't touch that fence. The command cut across the quiet country road just as Ethan Walker drove the final cedar screw into the repaired gate. He stopped, one hand still wrapped around his cordless drill, and looked toward the black SUV rolling over the wet gravel. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out before the vehicle had fully settled. "Who authorized you to work on this property?" "The owner did," Ethan replied calmly. "And who exactly told you that?" Ethan glanced toward the white farmhouse behind him. Morning rain still clung to the porch railing, and the air carried the clean scent of wet cedar and freshly turned earth. Beside the fence stood Claire Whitmore, the woman who, only hours earlier, had been struggling alone with 3 broken boards and a gate hanging crooked from one hinge. She had dirt on her jeans, work gloves tucked into her back pocket, and a loose strand of chestnut hair across her cheek. Nothing about her suggested the kind of power that arrived in polished SUVs. The suited man followed Ethan's gaze and immediately straightened. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice changing. "The board has been waiting. We need your approval before noon." Ethan's fingers loosened around the drill. Ms. Whitmore. He knew that name. Nearly everyone in the county did. Whitmore Development. Glass towers, luxury communities, commercial projects stretching across several states. And the quiet woman who had spent the morning handing him nails and laughing because she couldn't hold a fence post straight was Claire Whitmore, its chief executive officer. Ethan looked at her. Claire didn't look away. "Ethan," she said softly, "I can explain. You don't owe me an explanation." His voice remained quiet, but something had shifted beneath it. The suited man frowned. "Ms. Whitmore, who is this?" Claire opened her mouth, but Ethan answered first. "Just the guy fixing the fence." He bent down, placed the drill inside his battered toolbox, and closed the lid with a soft click. No anger, no accusation, just dignity. That was Ethan's way. Life had already taken enough from him to teach him that a man's character was rarely revealed by how loudly he defended himself. Sometimes it was revealed by what he refused to become. Claire watched him lift the toolbox, and for the first time that morning, the woman accustomed to commanding boardrooms seemed unsure of what to say. But 6 hours earlier, none of this had been about CEOs, corporations, or secrets. It had been about a broken fence. It had been about a stranger standing beside a rain-soaked road. And it had begun with one simple choice. At 7:12 that morning, Ethan's old Ford pickup was already running 10 minutes behind schedule when his 9-year-old daughter Sophie pointed through the windshield. "Dad, look." Ahead of them, part of a wooden fence had collapsed across the shoulder, and a woman was trying to drag a heavy cedar panel away from the road by herself. Ethan slowed. Sophie checked the dashboard clock. "We're already late." "A little," Ethan said. "Then why are we stopping?" Ethan pulled onto the gravel, switched off the engine, and looked at the stranger struggling beneath the gray morning sky. "Because she needs help now." Claire Whitmore had both hands wrapped around the edge of the fallen cedar panel when Ethan approached her that morning. "Hold on," he said. "You are going to ruin your back trying to move that alone." Claire looked over her shoulder, rain beating along the sleeves of her faded blue jacket. "I almost had it." Ethan studied the 6-foot section lying crooked across the muddy shoulder. "Sure you did." From the pickup, Sophie covered a smile with one hand. Claire noticed and laughed. It was small and unexpected, the kind of laugh that seemed unfamiliar even to her. Ethan lifted one end while Claire guided the other, and together they carried the panel back toward the property. The storm had done more than knock down a few boards. 2 posts had rotted near the ground. One hinge had twisted loose, and nearly 12 feet of fencing leaned toward the field as if exhausted from standing. Ethan crouched beside the nearest post and pressed his thumb into the damp wood. "This did not happen last night." Claire folded her arms. "The storm gets no credit? Maybe 10%. And the other 90? Ethan glanced toward the old white farmhouse. "Time." For a moment, Claire said nothing. Wind moved through the wet maple trees, carrying the smell of rain, cedar, and dark soil across the yard. Somewhere beyond the field, a church bell marked the quarter hour. Ethan checked his watch. Sophie was definitely going to be late now. "Dad?" she called through the open passenger window. "Mrs. Bennett is going to give me the look." Ethan smiled. "Tell her your father made a questionable scheduling decision." "Again?" Sophie asked. Claire laughed a second time. Ethan looked at her. There was something polished about the way she carried herself, even standing in mud. Her clothes were simple, but her words were measured. Her eyes seemed accustomed to noticing details other people missed. Still, Ethan saw only a woman with a broken fence and nobody around to help her. "I can clear this off the shoulder now," he said. "But those posts need replacing." Claire looked at the damage. "Can you do it?" "Yes. Today." Ethan hesitated. Work had been inconsistent for weeks, and his checking account was close enough to empty that he knew the exact number without looking. Yet he did not answer immediately. He looked towards Sophie instead. "After I get my daughter to school." Claire nodded. "What do you charge?" "Materials plus labor." "How much labor?" Ethan stood and brushed mud from his gloves. "I will know when I see what needs doing." Claire studied him. "You always start a job without naming a price?" "I have not started the job." He pointed toward the road. "I was just making sure nobody hit your fence." That answer quieted her. 20 minutes later, after Sophie disappeared through the school doors with an apologetic wave, Ethan drove to a local hardware store and bought 2 pressure-treated posts, cedar boards, exterior screws, and a new galvanized hinge. When he returned, Claire was waiting beside the gate with 2 paper cups of coffee. "Peace offering," she said, handing him one. Ethan took it. "For making my daughter late? For pretending I could lift that fence?" He smiled. "That might require a larger coffee." Claire shook her head, amused, and for the next 3 hours they worked beneath a clearing sky. Ethan measured. Twice. Claire held boards steady. He salvaged every piece of cedar that could still be used. She noticed that. She noticed everything. And Ethan never once asked what she did for a living, how much the farmhouse was worth, or why a woman with such careful hands seemed so comfortable giving instructions. To him, she was simply Claire. For Claire Whitmore, that was becoming the strangest part of the morning. By 11 o'clock, the clouds had broken apart, leaving pale sunlight across the wet field and tiny drops of water shining along the cedar boards. Ethan set the last replacement post, checked it with his level, then stepped back. Claire leaned against the gate with her coffee in both hands. "You always this particular?" she asked. "About fences?" "About everything." Ethan considered the question. "Things last longer when somebody cares enough to do them right." Claire looked toward the farmhouse. "My father used to say something like that. He built this place. He kept it alive." Her answer came softly. For the first time that morning, the confidence in her voice seemed to loosen. She told Ethan that her father had bought the farmhouse decades earlier, when the surrounding land was mostly pasture and two-lane roads. He had repaired the porch himself, planted the maple trees, and built the original fence with a neighbor. Claire had spent summers there as a girl, long before meetings and schedules had taken over her life. She stopped before saying more. Ethan did not press. He simply picked up another cedar board and measured it. That surprised her. Most people Claire met wanted something: information, access, approval, advantage. Ethan seemed perfectly comfortable allowing silence to remain silence. "What about you?" she asked. "What about me?" "You have asked almost nothing about me." Ethan glanced up. "You want me to?" Claire smiled faintly. "I am not sure." "Then I will wait until you are." The words were simple, but they landed somewhere deeper than he intended. Claire looked away toward the field. The breeze carried the smell of wet grass through the open gate, and a cardinal called from one of the maple trees. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then, Ethan's phone buzzed on the tailgate of his pickup. He wiped his hands and checked the screen. A message from the electric company reminded him that his payment was due Friday. Another notification showed the balance in his checking account. He closed both without comment. Claire noticed the change in his expression. "Everything all right?" "Everything that needs to be." That sounds carefully worded. Single parents get good at carefully worded. Claire lowered her coffee. "Sophie's mother?" Ethan's eyes settled on the fence. "She passed away 4 years ago." Claire's expression softened. "I am sorry." "Thank you." He tightened one screw, then another. Sophie was 5. Some days she remembers everything about her mother. Some days she gets scared she is forgetting. "So I remember for both of us." Claire said nothing. There were moments when sympathy became intrusive, when questions asked for more than grief should have to give. She seemed to understand that. Ethan respected her for it. A few minutes later, he swung the repaired gate. It moved smoothly and stopped exactly where it should. "There," he said. "That should hold." Claire walked along the fence, running her fingers lightly over the restored cedar. Ethan had replaced only what could not be saved. Old boards stood beside new ones, weathered silver beside warm brown. You could have replaced all of it, she said. Would have cost more. That is usually good for the person doing the work. Ethan shrugged. Not if the customer does not need it. Claire studied him with an expression he could not read. So what do I owe you? Ethan named the cost of the materials and a modest amount for his time. Claire stared at him. That is all. That is the job. Ethan, you spent most of your morning here. And now your fence works. Claire reached into her jacket, but Ethan raised one hand. Whatever you are thinking, do not make it complicated. For years, Claire Whitmore had lived in a world where everything had a price, every favor carried weight, and every kindness seemed to arrive with an invoice waiting somewhere behind it. Standing beside a repaired fence with mud on her boots, she found herself looking at a man who needed money far more than he admitted and yet refused to turn another person's problem into his opportunity. For the first time in a very long while, Claire wondered whether the poorest thing in her life had never been money at all. Claire reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded stack of bills. Ethan looked at the money, then at her. That is too much. You have not counted it. I do not need to. Consider the extra a thank you. You already bought the coffee. Claire almost smiled. Ethan, please. He took enough to cover the materials and the labor he had quoted, then gently placed the rest on top of the nearest fence post. I told you what the job cost. Claire stared at the bills. And if I want to pay more? Then you would be paying for something I did not earn. You could use it. The words escaped before Claire could soften them. Ethan's expression changed, not with anger, but with a quiet stillness that made her immediately regret the assumption. He glanced toward his old Ford pickup, its faded paint carrying 15 years of sun and winter salt. Probably, he said. Claire waited. Ethan closed his toolbox. Needing money and earning money are not the same thing. The yard went silent except for water dripping from the maple leaves. Claire had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars without losing her composure. Yet one carpenter in worn work boots had just made her reconsider the meaning of value. I did not mean to insult you, she said. I know. Then why does it feel like I did? Ethan lifted the toolbox into his truck. Because you are decent enough to notice. Claire lowered her eyes. There was no judgment in his voice. That somehow made the lesson heavier. Before Ethan could close the tailgate, Claire pointed toward the farmhouse. There is one more thing. Another fence. The gate near the barn sticks every time it rains. Ethan checked his watch. I have about 40 minutes before I need to pick Sophie up. Can 40 minutes save a gate? Depends how stubborn the gate is. Claire led him around the farmhouse, where an older wooden gate sagged between two stone pillars. Ethan inspected the hinge, while Claire stood beside him. Your father built this too? He did. Then we fix it. We do not replace it. Claire looked surprised. You have not even checked whether it can be saved. You called it your father's gate instead of an old gate. Ethan removed a screwdriver from his toolbox. That tells me what matters. Claire became very quiet. Together they loosened the rusted hardware, reset the hinge, and lifted the gate until it swung freely again. Claire tried tightening one of the screws herself, but the screwdriver slipped twice. Ethan watched without interfering. On the third attempt, she got it. There, she said, almost proudly. Chief Gate Repair Specialist. Do not put that on a business card yet. She laughed, and Ethan smiled. For several minutes, they were simply two people repairing something old because it deserved another chance. When Ethan finally packed his tools, Claire walked him to the driveway. Sophie seems like a wonderful kid. She is the best thing I have ever been trusted with. She is lucky. Ethan shook his head. I am. Claire watched him climb into the truck. That answer stayed with her. At the end of the driveway, Ethan lowered his window. Your gate should hold now. And if it does not, call me. Claire paused. I do not have your number. Ethan tore a small business card from a worn booklet in the console and handed it to her. Walker Home Repair. Carpentry, fences, decks, general maintenance. No glossy logo. No corporate slogan. Just a name, a phone number, and honest work. Claire held the card as his truck disappeared down the road. Then her own phone began vibrating inside her jacket. 6 missed calls. 3 messages marked urgent. One from Richard Hale. The board meeting had been moved forward. Claire looked from the glowing screen to Ethan's simple card in her hand. 2 worlds. 2 measures of success. And before the day was over, those worlds were about to collide. The first black SUV appeared at the end of the driveway less than 10 minutes after Ethan had pulled away. Then came a second. Claire stood beside the repaired gate with Ethan's business card still between her fingers as tires whispered over wet gravel. Richard Hale stepped from the lead vehicle wearing a charcoal suit that looked untouched by the morning rain. Two project managers followed him carrying leather folders and rolled site plans. "Claire," Richard called, checking his watch. "We have been trying to reach you for nearly an hour. I noticed. The board meeting starts in 40 minutes. Claire slipped Ethan's card into her jacket pocket. "Then we have 40 minutes. Richard looked toward the farmhouse, then toward the freshly repaired fence. "You actually fixed this?" "Someone did." "Why?" Claire turned slowly. "Because it was broken." Richard gave a short laugh, but Claire did not join him. They walked toward the porch while one of the managers unfolded a large development map across the hood of the SUV. Colored lines divided several nearby parcels into numbered sections. Claire studied them. The Whitmore Creek redevelopment project had been discussed for months, but until that morning it had existed mostly as financial projections, zoning reports, and clean geometric shapes on presentation screens. Standing on her father's land made those lines feel different. "Phase 3 is the important piece," Richard said, tapping the map. "Once we acquire the remaining residential parcels along Millstone Road, we can clear the corridor and begin infrastructure work before winter." Claire's eyes followed his finger. Millstone Road. Something about the name caught in her mind. "How many families?" she asked. Richard paused. "Families? How many people live there?" "I would have to check." "You are recommending that we acquire their homes, and you do not know how many people live there?" Richard adjusted his cuff. "We know the property values. That is what matters for acquisition." Claire looked at him. "That was not my question." One of the project managers quietly opened a folder. 37 households, she said. Mostly working families. A few retirees. Richard exhaled. "Claire, everyone will receive fair market value. This is business, not charity." The word charity landed strangely after Ethan's refusal to accept money he had not earned. Claire looked back toward the fence. Old cedar beside. New cedar. Nothing useful discarded simply because replacing everything would have been easier. "Are there alternatives?" she asked. "Not profitable ones." "That is not the same as no alternatives." Richard's expression tightened. "The board expects approval today." Claire folded the map. "Then the board can expect questions." Across town, Ethan knew nothing about the conversation happening on that driveway. At 3:15, he waited outside Sophie's elementary school with the pickup engine idling softly. Sophie climbed inside and dropped her backpack between her feet. "Did you fix the fence?" "I did." "Was the lady nice?" "She bought coffee." Sophie nodded seriously. "Then she is probably trustworthy." Ethan laughed. "That is your standard?" "Good coffee matters." They drove home along Millstone Road, past modest manufactured homes, small porches, bicycles leaning against railings, and yards still wet from the storm. Their own rented home sat near the far end of the community beneath an old oak tree. It was not much, but Ethan had built Sophie a bookshelf beside her bedroom window, repaired the porch steps, and planted her mother's favorite yellow roses near the mailbox. Home was rarely about square footage. It was about what love had repaired inside it. That evening, after Sophie began her homework, Ethan opened the mail at the kitchen table. Electric bill, insurance notice, rent reminder. He arranged them carefully beside his checkbook. Then his eyes stopped on an envelope addressed to every resident of Millstone Road community. The return address read Whitmore Development Corporation. Ethan opened it. He read the first sentence once. Then again. Proposed property acquisition. His hand became still. Outside, Sophie's laughter drifted through the open window as she talked to a friend next door. Ethan looked toward the yellow roses by the mailbox, then back at the letter. He had spent his morning repairing a stranger's fence. He had no idea the company carrying her last name might soon decide whether his own daughter still had a home. Ethan was still holding the letter when Sophie walked into the kitchen carrying a math worksheet and a yellow pencil. "Dad, what is proposed property acquisition?" The question stopped him. He folded the notice once and placed it beside the checkbook. "Where did you hear that?" Sophie pointed at the envelope. "I read it when I got the mail." Ethan pulled out the chair beside him. "It means a company is interested in buying this property." Sophie looked around the small kitchen as if seeing it differently. "Our house. The whole community, maybe. Do we have to leave?" 3 quick questions could sometimes carry more weight than 100 pages of corporate language. Ethan looked toward the refrigerator, where Sophie's school pictures were held beneath mismatched magnets. Her mother's handwritten pancake recipe was taped beside them, faded at the edges. Through the window, the yellow roses moved gently in the evening breeze. "Nobody has decided anything yet," he said. "But if they do?" Ethan reached across the table and covered Sophie's hand with his. "Then we handle it together." Sophie studied his face. "You always say that." "Because it is always true." She nodded, but the worry did not completely leave her eyes. After dinner, Ethan helped her finish fractions, checked tomorrow's weather, packed her lunch, and waited until the light beneath her bedroom door finally went dark. Only then did he return to the kitchen. The house became quiet enough for him to hear the refrigerator hum. He opened the letter again. Whitmore Development Corporation. The name no longer felt like ink on paper. It had a face now. Claire. Ethan took her business card from his wallet, stared at the number, then set it down without calling. He had helped a stranger because she needed help. That act did not give him the right to ask for special treatment. Across town, Claire sat at the head of a long conference table beneath cold white lights. Richard Hale stood beside a screen displaying maps of Millstone Road. 37 households, Claire said. "What relocation plan have we offered them?" Richard clasped his hands. "Fair market value plus standard moving assistance. And affordable housing within the same school district." Silence. "I asked a question, Richard. That is not our responsibility." Claire looked around the table. Several board members lowered their eyes toward their reports. "It becomes our responsibility when our profit depends on uprooting families." Richard leaned forward. "We are building a development worth more than $80 million. Sentiment cannot drive land strategy. Neither can convenience." He clicked to another slide. "There is no financially serious alternative." Claire's gaze narrowed. "Show me every alternative your team reviewed." Richard hesitated. It lasted only a second, but Claire noticed. There was an early mixed-use preservation concept, one board member said. Richard turned toward him. "It was inefficient." "How inefficient?" Claire asked. "Lower margins." "That was not my question." The room went quiet again. Claire remembered Ethan placing the extra money on the fence post. Needing money and earning money are not the same thing. She had spent years believing discipline meant protecting the company from emotion. Now she wondered whether power without conscience was simply another form of carelessness. "No acquisition moves forward until I see that preservation plan," she said. Richard's jaw tightened. "The schedule cannot absorb a delay." "Then change the schedule." "Claire, the investors will not like this." She closed the folder. "They do not have to like every decision. They have to trust that we know what we are building and what it costs beyond dollars." By the next morning, Ethan had already left for a small deck repair when his phone rang. He saw Claire's name because he had saved the number from her card. He let it ring twice before answering. "Ethan." Her voice was careful. "I need to talk to you about Millstone Road." Ethan stopped beside his truck. "So you know where I live?" Claire went silent. "I found out last night." "And the letter?" "I know about that too." Ethan looked across the street at Sophie climbing onto the school bus. "Then there is something you should understand before we talk." "What?" His voice remained calm. "What I did for you yesterday does not buy anything from you today." Claire was silent for a moment before answering. "I was not calling to repay you." Ethan watched the school bus disappear around the corner. "Good. I was calling because you deserve to know what is happening. So do the other 36 families." Another silence. Claire leaned back in her office chair, surrounded by glass walls and a skyline that suddenly felt very far from Millstone Road. "You are right. I am not trying to be right, Claire." "Then what are you trying to be?" Ethan looked toward the small porch he had repaired 2 summers earlier. "A father who can tell his daughter that people with power still listen when ordinary people speak." Claire closed her eyes briefly. There was no accusation in his voice, only a standard. Somehow, that was harder to ignore. "Meet me at the farmhouse at noon," she said. "Why?" "Because there is something you should see." Ethan almost refused. He had a deck repair scheduled, bills waiting on the kitchen table, and no interest in turning yesterday's kindness into leverage. But Claire added, "Not for you. For everyone on Millstone Road." At noon, Ethan pulled into the farmhouse driveway. Claire was standing beside the restored fence, but she was no longer wearing jeans and work gloves. She wore a navy business suit, and 3 black SUVs were parked near the barn. Richard Hale stood beside a folding table covered with site plans. His eyes moved from Ethan's faded pickup to his worn work boots. "This is the consultant?" he asked. "No," Claire said. "This is Ethan Walker." Richard waited as if the name should mean something. "And why is Mr. Walker here?" "He lives on Millstone Road." Richard's expression cooled. "Then this is inappropriate." Ethan set his hands loosely at his sides. "I can leave." "No," Claire said. Richard gave a restrained sigh. "Claire, residents cannot participate in internal development strategy." "He is not participating. He is listening." "That is worse." Ethan looked at Claire. "Maybe he is right." "He is not." Richard turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker, the company has procedures. Every resident will receive the required notices and a fair offer. Personal access to the chief executive officer does not change that." Ethan held his gaze. "I never asked it to." "Then we agree." "Not quite." Richard raised an eyebrow. Ethan's voice remained quiet. "You keep talking about fair offers. I am wondering whether you have ever walked through the place you are pricing." Richard glanced toward Claire. "Is this necessary?" Ethan continued. "Mrs. Carter in Lot 14 is 72. Her husband planted the oak beside her porch 40 years ago. The Ramirez family has 3 kids who walk to the elementary school. My daughter knows every neighbor between our house and the bus stop. You can put a number on the land. That does not mean you measured what is there." The wind moved softly through the cedar fence. No one spoke. Claire watched Richard, then Ethan. One man had arrived with projections. The other had arrived with names. Richard finally said, "Emotion does not make a project viable." Ethan nodded. "No, but forgetting people can make it wrong." Claire placed one hand on the rolled site plan. "Show him the preservation concept." Richard stiffened. "That document is preliminary." "Show him." A project manager slowly unrolled a second plan. Ethan leaned closer. Instead of clearing Millstone Road, the design curved around most of the existing homes and converted and used acreage into shops, green space, and community facilities. Ethan studied it carefully. "This keeps the neighborhood." "Most of it," Claire said. "Then why was it rejected?" Richard answered before she could. "Because it earns less." Ethan looked at Claire, but he did not ask her for mercy. He did not remind her about the fence. He simply stepped back from the table. "Then I guess you have to decide what enough looks like." Claire stared at the plan. For years, she had believed leadership meant knowing what a company could afford to build. Ethan Walker had just reminded her that character was deciding what it could afford not to destroy. Claire did not answer Ethan immediately. She looked down at the preservation plan, where thin blue lines curved around Millstone Road instead of cutting through it. "How much less?" she asked. Richard knew exactly what she meant. "Claire, we have already covered this." "Then the numbers should be easy." One of the project managers checked the financial summary. Projected return is approximately 12% lower over 5 years. Ethan said nothing. He had not come to negotiate corporate margins. He had come because 37 households deserved to be more than numbers on a map. Claire tapped the plan once. "And the preservation version still makes money?" The manager nodded. "Yes." Richard stepped closer. "Less money. That distinction matters." Claire turned toward him. "So does this one. Lower profit is not the same thing as a loss." The breeze lifted the corner of the site plan. Ethan reached forward and held it down with 2 fingers. Such a small gesture, but Claire noticed it. He was always fixing what was in front of him without demanding credit for it. "What happens to the families under this version?" Ethan asked. The manager pointed toward Millstone Road. "Most homes remain where they are. 6 would need temporary relocation during utility upgrades, but the plan includes returning those residents afterward." "Same school district?" "Yes." "Same community?" "Yes." Richard exhaled. "We are not designing public policy around one man's questions." Claire rolled the plan closed. "No. We are correcting a decision because the questions should have been asked before today." Richard stared at her. "You are willing to change an $80 million project because a handyman repaired your fence?" Ethan's face tightened slightly, but Claire's voice stayed level. "No. I am willing to change it because it is the better project." She looked toward the farmhouse, then the cedar fence her father had once built. "And because I should have noticed that sooner." Richard gathered his folder. "The board will push back. Then I will answer them. Investors will push back. Then I will answer them too. And if they blame you?" Claire met his eyes. "That is what my name on the office door is for." Ethan watched Richard walk toward the SUV. There was no celebration in him, only a quiet release of breath. Claire turned back. You could say thank you. For what? She blinked. For saving your neighborhood. Ethan shook his head gently. You have not saved anything yet. Claire almost smiled. You really do make gratitude difficult. I am grateful. But those families should not owe you gratitude for being treated with respect. The words were not cruel. That was what gave them weight. Claire looked at him for a long moment. You are right. That cannot be easy for a chief executive officer to say. You would be surprised. I probably would. A small smile passed between them, then disappeared as quickly as it came. Claire extended her hand. I will take the preservation plan to the board this afternoon. Ethan shook it. Then I hope they listen. So do I. 3 hours later, the Whitmore Development boardroom was quiet as Claire stood beside the revised proposal. She explained the reduced margins, the infrastructure changes, and the preservation of Millstone Road. Richard challenged the numbers. 2 directors questioned the delay. Claire answered every concern without raising her voice. Then she placed a photograph on the table. It showed the old farmhouse fence, weathered boards standing beside new cedar. My father taught me that development should improve what exists, not erase it simply because starting over is easier. No one spoke. Claire continued. We can make 12% more by removing 37 households. Or we can make enough and leave a community standing. I know which company I am willing to lead. The vote took less than 20 minutes. That evening, Ethan was washing dinner dishes when his phone rang. Claire spoke before he could say hello. The plan passed. Ethan closed his eyes. From the kitchen table, Sophie looked up from her homework. Millstone Road stays. For several seconds, Ethan could not answer. Then he looked at his daughter, at the yellow roses beyond the window, and at the home that would still be home tomorrow. Thank you, he said quietly. Claire's voice softened. There is one more thing, Ethan. He smiled faintly. There always seems to be. This time, I need you to trust me. 3 days later, Claire parked a plain silver sedan beneath the oak tree outside Ethan's home. Sophie saw her first and hurried onto the porch. Dad, the fence lady is here. Ethan looked up from a cabinet door he was sanding at the kitchen table. Her name is Claire. Sophie considered that. Claire the fence lady is here. By the time Ethan stepped outside, Claire was walking up the path with a large cream envelope tucked beneath one arm. No driver. No assistants. No black SUVs. You said I needed to trust you, Ethan said. I remember. That envelope is not helping. Claire smiled. It is not a check. That helps a little. Sophie appeared behind him. Is it good news? Claire looked at her. I hope so. They sat around Ethan's kitchen table, the same table where the acquisition letter had rested only days earlier. Claire placed the envelope between them. Ethan did not touch it. Before you open this, she said, I need you to understand something. Millstone Road staying was not a favor to you. Good. You make serious conversations difficult. I have been told. Sophie raised her hand. I think he does that on purpose. Claire laughed, and even Ethan had to smile. Then Claire's expression became serious again. The revised development requires restoration work. Fences, porches, community buildings, exterior carpentry, accessibility upgrades, and repairs to several older structures we are preserving. Ethan looked at the envelope. Claire, let me finish. He leaned back. All right. I asked our procurement team to identify qualified local contractors. Your business was reviewed the same way the others were. References, insurance, work history, estimates, everything. Ethan's brow tightened. You check my references? Everyone. That seems excessive. Your customers disagree. Mrs. Donnelly said you repaired her porch railing 2 years ago and refused to charge her for replacing 3 loose screws because you were already there. Ethan looked mildly embarrassed. That took 5 minutes. She remembered it for 2 years. Claire slid the envelope toward him. This is not charity. It is an invitation to submit the final bid as the preferred local contractor for the first phase. If your pricing and schedule meet the written requirements, Walker Home Repair will receive the restoration contract. Ethan slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a formal project packet bearing the Whitmore development. Seal. He read the first page, then the second. His eyes stopped at the projected contract range. $185,000 over 12 months, with options for additional phases based on performance. Ethan read the number again. Sophie leaned closer. Dad. He did not answer. Claire waited. The kitchen clock ticked softly above the refrigerator. Sunlight moved across the worn tabletop, catching the edge of the business card Ethan had once handed her beside a broken gate. This would mean hiring people, he finally said. Yes. A real crew. Yes. And enough steady work to stop wondering what next month looks like. Claire nodded. If you earn the contract. Ethan looked at her. You made sure to say that part. I thought you would appreciate it. His eyes returned to the packet. For years, Ethan had survived one repair at a time. One deck, one porch, one fence. He had never asked anyone to rescue him. He had only asked life for enough room to keep standing. Now the opportunity in his hands was not a gift that erased his dignity. It was a door his own work had opened. Sophie touched his sleeve. Dad, are you okay? Ethan swallowed, then smiled. I think so. Claire stood to leave, but Ethan stopped her. Why me? She looked at him for a long moment. Because when you thought I was nobody important, you treated me like I mattered. And when you learned I had power, you refused to treat yourself like you mattered less. Ethan had no answer. Claire smiled gently. That silence looks good on you.